One of the things on our wall over there for house rules, be real, be merciful, and be expectant. Be expectant. We're walking out the things the Bible says. We're leaning into those. And we expect that God is going to give out his gifts to us like he says he would, because that's the Father that we serve. So I'm going to hand it over to Merv. Now, if you haven't had the opportunity to meet Merv, this is Merv. How long? Yay. So how long have you guys been coming here now? I'm trying to remember.
About a year.
About a year.
Yeah.
So Merv and Noel, they came from Kamloops, and they were connected with the Kamloops Vineyard there. Just so you know, when you come here, we do check you out from the old pastors and give them a call and say, hey, what's this guy all
Weird
about?
guy.
And David, he just has nothing but wonderful things to say about Merv and Noel. They've been a part of their team forever. That's always what you love to hear, rather than to go, And when Merv approached me a few months ago, just saying, hey, this is on my heart. And again, I connected with David. Hey, what are your thoughts on that kind of thing? David said, man, you guys will be absolutely blessed. Absolutely blessed. And that was, he said, just you let him go and do his thing. So I'm super excited. When it comes from somebody that I highly respect like that as well, and I'm getting to know Merv. In a year you get to know someone here and there, but coming from someone very highly respected by Megan and I, David and Debbie Toombs out there in Kamloops too, just have nothing but wonderful things and saying that we're going to be blessed. So expect to be blessed. Expect that God is going to move. Expect that we're going to be empowered to do the things that Jesus did. And I'm going to give it to you, Merv. You can intro it,
Okay.
And then take it from there.
All right, thank you. One of the things that came up in our conversation between Jeff and I was that everybody has spiritual gifts, and some people have told me they don't have any, but the Bible does tell us that everybody has gifts. They're given to everyone as God decided. And so a number of things that we want to do in these sessions. One is that we want to take out all the fear of spiritual gifting. And I've run into a lot of people over the years who have fear about spiritual gifting because they've either been hurt through it or haven't had any solid teaching on it, or maybe it just didn't absorb. Lots of different reasons, and so we want to take all the fear out of that. I want you all to be comfortable here. Like I said this morning, no one's going to be put on the spot or singled out or humiliated, anything like that. God's intention for us is to use our gifts, and we can probably all either identify ourselves with this or know of someone who is gifted but doesn't walk in the gifting. And usually there's good reason for it. It can be fear, it can be past hurt, it can be lack of understanding of how to go about it. We're going to talk about all of those things. A number of years ago, and I love fishing, and I caught a nice trout, and I brought it to my mother. I was living in the interior, and she was in Abbotsford at the time. And I brought it to her, and I gave her this beautiful trout. And she said, oh, thank you. Just put it in the freezer for me. And so I did. And it came and went and came and went. And a couple of years later, I was going to get something out of the freezer when I was visiting. And she said, oh, just look in the freezer. Open the freezer. And that trout is still there. And I said, Mom, I recognize this fish. Do you not like fish? I knew she did. She said, well, I just didn't know how to cook it. And I think a lot of times we have gifts that we don't know how to use or don't know how to cook, so to speak. And so we want to dive into that stuff during these sessions. A number of years ago, before I retired, I worked as a senior wound care RN in a complex wound care clinic. And a guy came in one day, and he's got the end of his finger sawed off. And I took care of that, and we patched him up, and away he goes. And about 4 or 5 days later, the end of the week, somebody else comes in, and I'm asking these guys, how'd this happen? Oh, this at school, I had an accident with a table saw. And somebody else shows up a few days later, and they've got a hole through their hand. How'd that happen? Oh, the drill press slipped. Where do you go to school? Same place. So after several of these injuries, I called up the principal and I said, we have a little problem here. So far I've seen 3 of your students within a space of about 3 weeks with injuries, shop-derived injuries. Are they getting any safety training? And he said, I don't know. He said, but I'll check on it. I'll go talk to the shop instructors. And that was the end of the injuries. No more injuries. I was there for a total of 7 years, I think, and that all happened in the first year. And after that, 6 years down the road, I had not seen any more injuries. 3 in the first 3 weeks. So, teaching about safety in using power tools is essential, and we're going to talk about spiritual power tools and the safety around them. We're going to talk about the foundation for spiritual gifts, what we actually grow them on, and a number of other things. We're going to talk about identifying gifts. How do you identify your own gifts? How you help other people identify their gifts? We're going to talk about blessing. Today we're going to be focusing largely on blessing. And blessing is actually a huge subject. There are lots of ways to bless people, and there are different kinds of blessing. And we want to look at that and talk about how we can bless the people we rub shoulders with. And some of the things might surprise you. We'll talk about that.
You were the Word at the beginning, one with God, the Lord Most High.
I want to just say a couple of things to some of the younger folks first. And like if you're really old, like if you're over 20 or something, just, you know the drill. Okay. One of the things that I had a lot of difficulty with when I was in school, high school, elementary school, whatever, was how do I share my faith with my friends? That was a real issue, and it was scary. And I wish I knew then what I've learned since then. That it doesn't have to be scary, and it actually can be very exciting. And I learned some things about how to speak into people's lives so that they come alive. And those are some of the things we're going to be talking about. And I went from scary to exciting. And I want to share that journey with you through these sessions. I have a friend. His name is Brian. He lives up north in Hazelton. And he had a couple of sons. And Brian has lots of tools in a shop and all this. And one day he just said, "Where's Ben? I don't see him." And his first thought was, go out into the shop. He likes to be in the shop. He went out into the shop, and here's Ben. He was 5 at the time. And he's got a sawhorse. And he's got a little piece of 2x4 balanced on the sawhorse. And he's got his dad's skill saw. And he's got it plugged in. And he's going to cut this 2x4. And Brian walked in just as he's going like this, and he just reached over and pulled the plug. And probably saved his arm. So in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, we're told that we can do all kinds of impressive things And it lists some of them. We can speak in weird languages, and we can do demonstrations of God's power. We can perform miracles. We can say to a mountain, "Hey, jump," and the mountain jumps. But if we don't have love as a foundation for that, it's noise is one of the primary barriers to functioning as functioning in the role of bringing the love of Jesus to people. Noise can come in a lot of forms. Years ago, I built an airplane. I love flying. And so it took me 9 years to build this airplane. I bought some plans from a designer down in South Carolina, and he sent them up, and I started to work in my little shop and built all the parts except for the engine and instruments and wheels, I guess, and the propeller. And it was a labor of love. And it was at a time in my life when I needed a distraction. I needed something. There were horrendous things going on, and it was a painful time in my life. And I needed something that would take my mind off it. And I built this airplane. And I remember the first day, I built a wing rib. A wing rib is just a thing that gives profile to the wing. And there's about 24 of them in the airplane. And I got my first wing rib out of the jig, and I remember holding it up and saying, "Let me know, Lord, when you want it back." And so I built the plane and flew it around. And one day I woke up in the morning and I heard clearly in my spirit, it wasn't audible, but I heard it clearly in my spirit, "I'd like it back." So I cleaned it up, tweaked it, and put it up for sale. It was therapeutic while I had it, but if I had kept it any longer, it would have been noise. It would have been a distraction. It would have drawn me away from the things that God had prepared for me. But the plane would have interfered. And I can say to you honestly today, even though I love flying, I can tell you honestly that the things that have come into my life since letting go of what could have become a distraction, would have become a distraction, the things that have come in, I wouldn't trade for 1,000 planes. I actually have all fingers. just messing with your head. Here's a foundation, okay? Now, it was probably a good foundation when it was first built. Now you can see it's starting to sag in a few places. And if you were to drive by an empty lot and you see somebody out there with some kind of excavator and they dig a hole and drive by the next day and there's somebody building concrete forms, and by the end of the week they've got concrete poured in the forms and they strip the forms off and backfill it and everything. And then you drive by there for a whole year after that and nothing is done. And pretty soon the weeds start to come up and the foundation starts to deteriorate. The value of the foundation is only really in what you build on it. And if you don't build anything on the foundation, then that's almost the same as building something without a foundation, except that's a little worse. So the Bible tells us clearly that if we don't have a foundation of love, then all learning about spiritual gifts, all of the practicing of spiritual gifts is just noise. It detracts and subtracts from what we really need to be focusing on, which is bringing the love of Jesus to people. And although 1 Corinthians just it mentions specifically about love, I believe that's one of the focal points of the fruits of the Spirit. I believe that all of the fruits of the Spirit form the foundation on which we can build and grow our spiritual gifting. So let's talk about blessing. Yeah. So if I speak with God's word and with power, revealing all his mysteries and making everything plain as day, and if I have faith that says to a mountain, "Jump," and it jumps, but I don't have love, I'm nothing. I'm only making a noise. I've prayed for a lot of people that I don't know in my lifetime. I have no idea how many, hundreds for sure. And once in a while, I'd say, can I pray for you? And you get this look on their face like, oh, he thinks there's something wrong with me. Or, yeah, no thanks, I don't believe in God, so thanks. Anyway, eventually, a few years ago, I figured out that if I offer to pray a blessing over someone, I get a totally different response. And so, since I started doing that, I prayed for many people, total strangers, that, and I haven't had one person say no. Now, it may happen sometime, but it happened a lot more regularly when I didn't say that. Because most people want to be blessed, right? How many people do you know that would reject a blessing? Not a lot. So when I pray for someone, I may see things in their life that need to be touched by God. But I start by saying, can I pray a blessing over you? I'll give you an example. And I think this is one that actually, George, you told a story one time about my banjo, I believe. Yeah. So I was looking for a banjo that wouldn't cost much. I wanted a junker basically that could be rebuilt. And so I looked around. We were living in Mexico at the time, so I came across to San Diego and we looked around, and I found one that had the tone potential that I wanted. The banjo was a mess, and he was asking $200 for it, which was overpriced. My soul said, offer him $150. My spirit said, give him $200. And we're going to talk more about the soul versus the spirit and all the implications of that throughout the sessions. I listened to the spirit saying, give him what he's asking. So I gave him $200. And we met in a 7-Eleven parking lot. And Noel said to him, so just out of curiosity, why are you selling it? And he said, I'm 55 years old. I've worked at the same job all my life. I got laid off, downsizing and automation and so on. And I've been pounding the streets for several weeks. I can't find a job. Nobody wants to hire somebody at this stage in life that doesn't have a lot of highly tuned skills. It was just some kind of routine job he did. And so suddenly I understood why I was supposed to give him the $200, not the $150. He would have taken $150. He said, I'm selling it because I haven't played it for a couple of years and I really need the money. I got bills to pay, and so I'm just selling off stuff that I don't really need right now. And so I said, that's really hard. I've been in a similar situation at one time in my life, and I know it hurts. How would you feel if I prayed a blessing over you? And first he kind of did that, and he said, yeah, I could really use that. I need some blessing in my life. So there in the 7-Eleven parking lot, we prayed blessing into this man. And as I prayed blessing into him, God started to show me things in my spirit about his situation that he had said nothing about. And so I started to pray into those things. And he starts to cry. He's weeping because, and later he said, you know all about me, don't you? I said, no, but God does. And he told me a few things. And we talked, and the upshot of it was that he left there saying, you have no idea how much more hopeful I feel now. I feel like I can go on with life. And I've seen that happen a good number of times after praying blessing over someone. Had I just come to him and said, you know what, I think there's some things wrong in your life. Let me pray over them. He would say, yeah, no, not today, and he'd leave. But he received the blessing because he knew he needed blessing. And as he received the blessing, it brought down that barrier. And then after I prayed about the things that God was showing me, he voluntarily started telling me about other things that needed prayer as well. And it just opened up a whole world for this guy. And so I'm a really strong advocate of praying blessing over people, especially if they're people you don't know. It breaks down that barrier very quickly. And I can think back when I was in school. If I had, I remember one guy who had a lot of health problems quite suddenly, and he wasn't the most popular kid in the school. If I had known then what I know now, I could have gone to him just in private without a bunch of people watching and just say, you really need some blessing, don't you? Like something good in your life happened. And he would have said, yes, I know the guy. And I would have had an opportunity to pray a blessing into his life. And it could have changed a lot of things for him. I don't know where he is today, but I can't live in regret, but I do wish that I had understood then what I understand now. Two kinds of blessing that, and I didn't get this from any book. This is just something that, and other people may have different opinions, but it's just something that occurred to me as some time back. There's passive blessing and active blessing. Passive is like approval. A girl wants to get married, and her fiance goes to her father or mother and says, I'd like to marry your daughter. And the father says, do you have a job? Yep. Do you have a driver's license? Yep. Is it under suspension? Not anymore. I just got it back. How much do you drink? Do you get speeding tickets? And if the father's or mother are more or less impressed, they'll say, okay, you have my blessing. Marry this guy. Okay? And that's passive in that nothing has been spoken into that person's life. They ask a few questions, and in that case, blessing amounted to approval. Okay? What we're talking about here is not approval. It's a totally different thing. And it's what I refer to as an act of blessing, and this speaks to the spirit. The questions the guy asks, this guy wants to marry his daughter, are all about the soul. Okay, and we'll talk about that later. We won't get too far into it now. The blessing that we're talking about speaks to the spirit. It speaks to the deep part, the part of the person that is capable of connecting with God. I want to give you one other example. I was making a phone call to an office in Toronto a while back, and I talked to this lady who said, oh, you know what, I have to get some other information from another department. I'll ask them to send it over. And she said, rather than call back, because you might end up getting somebody else, why don't you just stay on the line and we'll just wait. And so we chatted and, all the usual weather stuff and that. And I sensed something in her voice that was just a little bit of anxiety. And I said to her, you sound a bit nervous. Are you okay? And she said, well, yeah, I am. I'm getting married next week. Never done this before. I'm nervous but excited and all this. And then I said, would you be okay if I prayed a blessing over your marriage and you and your fiancé? Silence. And I'm thinking, oh, I've overstepped. But then she said, no. She was just surprised. She said, no, that'd be awesome. And I started to pray over her and her fiancé. And again, as I prayed blessing into their lives, God started to speak to my spirit and show me things that they were going through, specific things. And so then I said, I feel like this might be going on. Does this resonate with you? And that's a good question to ask, because sometimes we can get it wrong. So I said, does this resonate with you? And she said, oh yeah. So I pray into that. And pretty soon I hear this on the other end of the line. And I said, are you okay? And she said, yeah. She said, nobody has ever done anything like this for me and for us. She said, I can hardly wait to get off work and go tell my fiancé, this is just the best day of my life. Okay. Something happened there, and it started with blessing. And that's, you can see why I'm such a strong advocate for speaking and praying blessing over people. And it often, not always, but it often leads into more things, prayer about other things, often at their request. Okay? And that's where the fear comes out of it. When you get people asking you, oh, could you pray for me about this? People that would never say that if you just said, hey, can I pray for you? But when you bless them, you open up a door to their heart, to their spirit. And the fear and even the embarrassment of asking someone to pray, especially a non-Christian, suddenly that starts to wash away. And I've had a number of non-Christian people ask me to pray about specific things after praying a blessing for them. I've had Muslims ask me that. I've had atheists ask me that. I've had even one Jehovah's Witness ask me that. I've had a number of people from all different walks of life ask me that question. So you can see where the open door is, right? It's there. And had I understood that years ago, I would have operated in a lot less fear. The thing I want to communicate most is that anyone can bless anyone. Somebody, and this is a question I've been asked a number of times. So what do you do if you don't have any spiritual gifts? How do you spread the gospel of Jesus if you don't have any spiritual gifts? And my answer to that is that according to the Bible, everyone, even non-Christians, have spiritual gifts. You look in 1 Corinthians, it says God gives to each one several gifts as however he desires. And you think about it. Are there non-Christian people who have a gift of teaching that are just really good at it? Well, the Bible says that's a spiritual gift. Are there people who are very good at administrating? Another spiritual gift. Okay? So I believe that everyone has spiritual gifts.
I visited someone in the hospital recently.
And life has not been easy for her. And there have been a lot of health setbacks and stuff. And she can't walk anymore. And she's had a couple strokes, and some words just don't come quickly, and forgets things. And she was feeling kind of down when I went in, and so we talked about this. And I said to her, you have gifts that aren't limited by the fact that you can't walk and that you have to search for words. You have gifts, spiritual gifts, that the people here right in this hospital need and wherever you go. She said, yeah, really? I said, yeah. When you see a nurse come in who's looking sad, you can say, you know, I see you don't look real happy. Are you okay? Can I pray a blessing over you? And suddenly when I said that, her eyes just lit up and said, oh yeah, I can think of at least 3 people right now that I can pray a blessing for. And it went from this position of fear to a position of excitement. When we speak blessing, we are infusing God's favor into people. We're taking God's favor and we're saying, here, have this. That's what we're doing when we bless people. When we act on authority from our Father, our blessing confers His kindness. And that's an important thing to remember. Most people want to be treated kindly. And so when we speak and pray a blessing over someone, we are conferring God's kindness on them. That usually goes over well. The year before we came here, we spent a year traveling around we bought an RV and a truck, and we dragged that thing all over the Western Canada, visiting our kids and grandkids that are spread all over the place. And we spent a year doing that. So we got this trailer in Prince George. I responded to an ad and I had the truck by this point, so I drove up there and bought the trailer. And the guy said, you know what, I just feel like I should give you a couple $100 off on that. I know. He didn't have to, but he did. And I saw an opportunity there, and I said to him, as after I got the trailer hooked up and was ready to pull out of the driveway, and his wife was standing there, and I said to him, I would like to return your blessing. You've blessed me. Can I bless you? And they looked at each other. Yeah, I guess so. And so I started to pray a blessing over them. And as I did, I felt God's Spirit saying, she's got some health problems. And she has health problems. She's smiling and everything and laughing and stuff. And I said, just tell me if I'm off the wall here, but I'm just sensing that you have some serious health problems. And suddenly the smile went away and she said, yeah, I have cancer. And I started to pray. So they'd already given me permission to pray blessing over them. So I started to pray blessing over them. And this, hearing God's voice say, there's something else wrong here, that came before I even started praying. And then I prayed, and then by this time, they were wide open to receive not only blessing, but prayer into her health. And we stood in the driveway for half an hour and prayed. And they were just holding each other and weeping by the time we were done. I guess they didn't care what the neighbors thought. And it was an exciting time. We carry the authority to speak kindness, God's kindness into people's lives. We have the authority to speak hope into people's lives. Anybody here doesn't want to be particularly hopeful? No, I didn't think so. Yeah. Everybody I've met wants hope. They would like to have some hope. Not everybody has hope, but everybody would like to have hope. We have the authority to speak hope into people's lives. I went on a trip to Northwest Territories to help out a pastor up there a few years ago, and we had an elderly man come along. He was 80, not that old, 84, 85, something like that, which isn't all that old anymore. And I guess the closer you get to that, the less old that seems. And we were sitting in the vehicle, somebody else was driving, and we got talking about spiritual gifting, and he said, well, yeah, I don't actually have any spiritual gifts. He says, and I don't have any authority, so what do I do? So I said, have you ever said a kind word to anyone? Yeah, of course. Okay, so you have the authority to be kind to people. Have you ever encouraged someone? He said, yeah, lots of times. Okay, so you have the authority to encourage people. Have you ever just listened to someone who need to pour out their heart? Oh yeah. Well, then you have the authority to listen to people's heart. And he said, okay, I get the idea. So he went along on this trip, and and every day he'd say, I'm thinking about those things. We come back. The following year, leading a team to Mexico. And at the last minute, he knocks on my door and he said, I heard you're taking some people to Mexico. I'd like to come. Can I come? And I said, yeah, if you can find a flight at this late stage, absolutely. He found a flight, joined us in Mexico. Now here's this guy who had just a very short time before thought he had no authority and no spiritual gifts. We were invited to go to a youth group. And we'd been invited to youth groups before, and normally what we'd do is we'd just listen, maybe share a few thoughts and just pray over people and with people. And so we got to this youth group, and there was quite a few young people. There's probably about 30, maybe 40. And they're all in this big room. And I look at, I don't see Irvin, this man. And I look around and I see he's off in the corner and he's pulled up a chair and he's got 3 or 4 kids around him. And he pulls a piece of string out of his pocket and he's showing them little tricks that you can do with string. So I was busy with some other people and next time I look over there, he's got about 8 or 10 kids around him. They've all pulled up chairs. And other kids are bringing string so that they can do the same things he's doing at the same time. And he's got them all engaged. He doesn't know a word of Spanish. These kids, some of them know a few words in English, but not a lot. So there really wasn't any verbal communication going on there. And then, and I didn't find this out till later, he starts to tell them in English about the love of Jesus and the forgiveness of Jesus. And he just goes on about this in English. After he's done, one of those kids comes to me and he says, I hardly know any English. I didn't really understand what he's saying, but it seemed important to him. Do you know what he was talking about? And I said, well, I didn't hear it, but I know him, and I'm pretty sure he was talking about the love of Jesus and the forgiveness of sins. Oh, could you tell me about that? So I just shared that with him, and he received Jesus that night. He was just one of the friends that one of the regulars had invited to come along to youth group. And this elderly man Irvin came to me after, and I told him what had happened after this kid had left his group. And he was so excited. He said, 84 years, and I finally get to play a part in someone coming to Jesus. So there's a lot of stuff in that. There's willingness, for one thing. And there was recognition of his authority and his spiritual gifting. He had a gift for connecting with these kids. It's not a gift that's maybe listed in the Bible, but those are just examples of gifts, I believe. There are lots of spiritual gifts. And he had a gift for what he was doing there. He went over there very deliberately, and he did deliberate things to connect with these kids. And the result was that one of them received Jesus that night. Blessing dispels fear. I teach online. I retired close to 10 years ago, officially. And I still teach about 30% time or 40% time online for a number of private colleges. And at the beginning of every new cohort of students, I ask them, how many of you are coming to class afraid of secondary education? And usually at least half the class will acknowledge that they are. And the rest of them won't acknowledge it. But, and I tell them that one of my objectives in this class is take out all fear of learning, all fear. And after a couple of sessions, they start to realize that I actually meant what I said. And when I think of that, I think, how many of us in churches have fear of new things, fear of venturing out, fear of taking that step into a new area that you're not familiar with? A lot of fear. But when we bless someone, we're imposing on that fear and driving it out. And we have the authority to do that. Blessing leads to multiplication and increase. You look at the stories, and I know we can't base a theology entirely on this, but consider the stories where Jesus fed all those people, right? Tons of people. And he did 2 things. If you read all the accounts, he did 2 things. One is he gave thanks for the food. Another is that he blessed he spoke blessing over it. And what resulted was multiplication. Okay? So blessing leads to multiplication and increase. And now I want to talk about parental blessing a bit. Parental blessing is a kind of special kind of blessing. Parental blessing refers to parents speaking active blessing into their children. Active blessing. Not just approval, but active blessing. When we speak active blessing, we're addressing who they are. We're addressing who my son or daughter really is. We're talking about blessing kind of in the Old Testament terms in which blessing in the Old Testament was very specific and it was expected to happen. And so when we speak blessing into our children, I have a couple of daughters. One is 43 and the other one is 5 years younger. And they still call me. And I was just over in the island and visiting them. And they still said, Dad, could you just bless me? Could you just bless me? They still do that. I haven't stopped being a father because they grew up and had their own families. And we have that opportunity to continue to bless, but not just our biological children. Be father to the fatherless and be a mother to the motherless. And so we can have lots of children. And it doesn't matter, it's a principle, it's not an age, it's not a chronicle age thing. Those of you, young people, you go to school, if you have more understanding about who God is and Jesus and all that, you have the authority to bless spiritual. You can have spiritual children. It's not a thing about chronology of age. It's about place in life. And so we all have that opportunity to speak blessing to people, and they can become our spiritual children. We feed them the things that we know and we've learned, and we watch them grow. And that's exciting. Parental blessing is powerful. It's intentional. We expect it to happen. And it positions our children to receive good things, whether they're biological children or spiritual children. On one of my trips to India, we were gathered in a room, and we were with a team, and there were a bunch of translators. They're all young people. They knew English quite well, and they were going to translate as we went out into the hinterland to do medical clinics and bring the gospel and so on. And so they kind of filed by our team and introduced themselves. And there was a young man, and as soon as he came along, my spirit said, "Don't let this guy go." And as he came along, I asked him his name, he told me, and I said, "I would like you to be my personal translator." I was the team leader, and I said, "I would like you to just stay with me the whole time we're here. Just be my translator. Would you do it?" And he agreed. And so after everybody's by, we're chatting for a bit, and I saw a group of the young translators over there, and I said, "That girl over there with the black hair, they all have black hair. That girl over there with the long black hair, that's kind of facing that way, I sense in my spirit there's something special about her. Do you know her?" He said, "Yeah, that's my fiance." And so I said, "Would you go bring her over?" And so he did. And I said, "I just feel like I need to pray blessing over your relationship, your upcoming marriage." And so I prayed over them. And they received that well. And anyway, they all left. And I was still in the room just organizing a few things. About 10 minutes later, this girl comes back. And she's crying. And I said, "Oh no, did he hit you?" No, I didn't say that. But you know, those thoughts, right? She was crying. And I said, "What is it? What's on your heart?" And she said, "I tried to leave here, but I had to come back and tell you that no one in my life has ever spoken blessing over me. And you have no idea what that's doing to me. And we talked for some time, and then her fiance came in, and we had some more prayer time. It was wonderful and all that. Anyway, as I was leaving India, they came to the airport to see us off. And they came over to me, and this girl gets down on her knees. She's got this long black hair, and she brushes her hair over my feet. And I think, okay, there's something significant about that. I have no idea what it is. And so when she was done with that, I asked her what that was about. And she couldn't speak. She was just choked up. And her fiance said, there's a tradition in this area. A daughter does that twice in her life. Once to her father when she's 8 years old, and again when she reaches womanhood. Her father died when she was 7. And she's saying that you are her spiritual father. And that relationship, it's still there. She's married, and she's married into a wonderful family where there's her father-in-law is a wonderful father to her. I want to talk a little bit about the activation that we're going to be talking about next. Activation is just doing some things that help us to solidify the things we're learning. Some people, one person said to me a couple of years ago, he said, I went to this prophetic meeting, but they were cheating. And I said, oh, how were they doing that? And he said, well, they were just using psychology. They were just looking at people and say, oh, you're wearing this or that. That means, and you're very tall, so that means, and I realized that it could be seen that way, but that's not what the Bible says about it. In Matthew 16, verse 2 or 4, somewhere in there, it talks about Jesus saying to the people, you have the understanding of the weather. You know that when the sky is red at night, it's going to be a good day tomorrow. And when the sky is red in the morning, a storm is coming. You can read the signs. Why aren't you reading the signs of the times? And when I read that, I realized that prophecy isn't necessarily hearing only directly from the Holy Spirit. We have to have that connection all the time that we speak prophetically and pray prophetically. However, we also, there's a legitimate reading of the signs. We talked about the soul and the spirit earlier, and we said, in Hebrews, it says that the word of God is so sharp that it divides the soul from the spirit. Why would we want to divide the soul from the spirit? Well, the soul, most biblical scholars these days agree that the soul is the mind, the will, and the emotions. Okay? That's the part of us. See, go back to the banjo story. My soul said, hey, you can get that for $50 less. And he probably would have. My spirit said, no, offer him what he's asking. Okay? And so that we'll have other examples through the sessions to help kind of clarify the difference between the soul and the spirit. But the soul sees the signs, observes, collects information. The spirit interprets it. Okay, who is your hero and why? What is your favorite color? And if you had a month holiday and money was not an issue, how would you spend the month? Okay? Now, you don't have to answer all of them. You can if you want, but pick one. I'd like you to pick one and answer it for yourself.
This exercise is best done in a group. However, you can do it if you're watching alone, but you'll need a volunteer to assist you. If you don't have one, you may want to skip this portion of the video and come back to it later when you have someone to assist you. The idea here is to listen to the person's response and then ask Holy Spirit to reveal the deeper meaning of those responses. This may take a while, so be patient. When you hear something, ask the person if it resonates with them. Does it feel like it fits? When group members have had an opportunity to share what they have heard, the next person shares their responses, and the process is repeated for that person. For next time, I would like you each to bring some object from your home, something that has significance to you, something that is really important to you. It might have been something someone special has given to you, or you found it on the beach, or picked it up in another country, or whatever, but something that carries significance for you, okay? On a trip in Mexico, when Noel and I were living down there, Gary Stevens, whom some of you know, used to be senior pastor at Abbotsford Vineyard, called me and said, could you come and translate we got a big group, and we have one other translator, but we need two because we're dividing the groups. Could you come and help us with that? So I went out, took a group, we were going door to door, delivering food hampers and just praying blessing on people. And there's a little girl, 9 years old, 8 or 9. And she was so shy, and she had her hat pulled down, and she kind of walked around like this. And so hopefully nobody would see her. We walked into a lady's house, and something happened to that girl. The Holy Spirit did something. All of a sudden, she pulls her hat back like this. She steps to the front, and she puts her hand out to this lady whose house we were at, and she starts to speak prophetically into that lady's life, and starts to say things that she had no way of knowing. And she was just going at it, and I hadn't even gotten around to translating yet, and this woman was already in tears because her spirit resonated with what this little girl was saying. And it was powerful. And then when I translated it, it was even, then she got the full impact of it. If you're a child or teenager or young adult, there is no age limit on how God can use you. So just be open to that. Just be open to that. Amazing things are happening through kids these days. Thanks.